Dr. Marcus Webb stared at the small container sitting on his laboratory table. Inside were biological samples from a planet called Earth, home to creatures that called themselves humans. As the chief scientist aboard the research station floating in deep space, Marcus had studied hundreds of different alien species. Most were peaceful plant-eaters or simple ocean dwellers. This should be just another routine day of looking at cells under his microscope. Emily Carter, his young assistant, walked into the lab carrying a steaming cup of coffee. She had been working with Marcus for 3 years and knew that new samples usually meant boring paperwork and predictable results. "What do we have today, Marcus?" she asked, settling into her chair at the computer console. "Standard biological material from Sol 3, Marcus replied, opening the container. "Hair, skin, blood, and saliva from the dominant species. The initial report says they are bipedal mammals with basic technology. Should be straightforward." James Harrison entered the lab, adjusting his white coat. As the station's medical officer, James often helped with biological analysis when they discovered new species. He had seen everything from silicon-based life forms to creatures that breathed methane, so nothing surprised him anymore. "Need an extra pair of eyes today?" Marcus nodded and handed James a sample slide. "Let's get this catalogued quickly. I have 17 other species samples waiting for analysis this week." Emily began entering basic information into the computer system. Species name, human. Planet, Earth, third from their sun. Classification, mammalian. Intelligence level, basic tool use and space travel. She had done this same process hundreds of times before. James placed the first slide under his microscope and adjusted the focus. What he saw made him pause. He blinked hard and looked again. The muscle fibers were incredibly dense, much more so than any species he had encountered. "Marcus, take a look at this," he called out, his voice carrying a note of confusion. Marcus walked over and peered through the microscope. The muscle tissue showed a fiber density that seemed impossible. According to their database, muscle fibers this dense should belong to creatures living on high-gravity worlds, not the moderate-gravity planet these humans called home. "Run a comparison with our database," he told Emily. Emily's fingers flew across the keyboard. Numbers appeared on the screen, and her expression shifted from boredom to concern. "Marcus, the computer says these muscle fibers are 40% denser than anything we've recorded from species of similar size and planetary conditions." "That must be an error," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. He had learned to trust his equipment over the years. "Run the analysis again, and this time check the bone samples too." James prepared another slide, this one containing bone marrow. Under the microscope, the bone structure looked more like metal than biological material. The density readings made him shake his head in disbelief. "These bones are incredibly thick and strong," he announced. "I'm seeing calcium deposits and mineral content that should belong to construction materials, not living tissue." Emily pulled up comparison charts on her screen. The bone density of humans ranked in the top 5% of all known species, despite their relatively average planet and size. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered, double-checking her calculations. Marcus felt a growing unease in his stomach. In 30 years of studying alien biology, he had never seen readings like these. Every species he had encountered made perfect sense based on their environment and evolutionary needs. Thick bones for heavy gravity worlds, dense muscles for high predator environments, enhanced organs for toxic atmospheres. But humans came from what appeared to be a moderate, comfortable planet. "Let's check their cardiovascular system," Marcus decided, preparing a blood sample. Under analysis, human blood showed an unusual number of red blood cells and a strange chemical composition. The heart muscle samples revealed something even more disturbing. James ran the cardiovascular data through 3 different analysis programs. Each one gave the same impossible result. "Marcus, according to this data, human hearts can pump blood at 3 times normal rate during stress. Their entire circulatory system is designed to operate at emergency levels that would kill most species." Emily discovered something else while reviewing the brain tissue samples. The neural density is extraordinary, but they are only using a small portion of their brain capacity under normal conditions. The rest appears to be dormant, waiting for activation. Marcus sat down heavily in his chair. These weren't the readings of a peaceful, moderate species from a comfortable planet. These were the biological specifications of something designed for survival in the most hostile conditions imaginable. "Run a complete genetic analysis," he ordered. "I want to know everything about these humans." Hours passed as the computer processed genetic information. The results painted a picture that made no sense. Humans possessed redundant organ systems, accelerated healing capabilities, and stress response mechanisms that turned them into completely different creatures when threatened. Marcus, Emily said quietly, I found something called adrenaline in their bloodstream. It's a natural chemical that increases strength, speed, and pain tolerance during dangerous situations. No other species we've studied produces anything like this. James discovered immune system capabilities that seemed designed to fight off biological attacks that didn't exist on their planet. They have white blood cell counts and antibody production rates that suggest constant biological warfare, he reported. Marcus looked at his colleagues, seeing his own growing alarm reflected in their faces. After 16 hours of analysis, one thing had become clear. Humans were not the peaceful, ordinary species their initial report had suggested. They were something else entirely, something that challenged everything the galactic scientific community thought they knew about biological evolution and survival adaptation. Contact the Council, Marcus said quietly. We're going to need a full research team for this one. Dr. Susan Mitchell arrived at the research station 3 days later with 4 additional scientists. She had earned her reputation by staying calm during the most unusual discoveries, but that reputation would not last long today. Thomas Baker, the team's expert in body chemistry, unpacked his equipment while Helen Roberts, who studied brain functions, set up her advanced scanners. Marcus showed them the initial findings, watching their faces change from professional interest to growing concern. We've never seen biological readings like these, he explained, pulling up the data on the main screen. Every measurement suggests these humans are built for extreme survival situations. Susan examined the muscle fiber samples first. She had studied the biology of creatures from ice worlds, lava planets, and gas giants, but human muscle tissue defied everything she understood about biological limits. This is impossible, she whispered, running the analysis for the 3rd time. No species can naturally grow muscle fibers this dense without massive energy requirements that would kill them. Thomas focused on the strange chemicals flowing through human blood. The substance they called adrenaline fascinated and terrified him. He had analyzed combat drugs from military species across the galaxy, but none came close to what humans produced naturally inside their own bodies. Emily, help me understand this, he called out. Humans create this chemical automatically when they face danger. Emily nodded, pulling up video footage that had come with the biological samples. The documentation shows humans in emergency situations. Watch what happens to their physical capabilities. The team gathered around the screen as footage played showing humans in crisis moments. A small human female lifted the front end of a ground vehicle to free someone trapped underneath. The vehicle weighed nearly 2 tons. Another clip showed a human male continuing to fight off attackers despite having 3 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder. Helen Roberts sat down heavily in her chair. As someone who had studied the brain functions of peaceful species for 20 years, she found the footage deeply disturbing. Their adrenaline doesn't just increase strength, she observed. It completely shuts down their pain reception and fear responses. They become different creatures entirely. Thomas ran calculations on his computer, trying to understand how human bodies survived such extreme chemical changes. The adrenaline increases their heart rate to levels that should cause cardiac arrest. It redirects blood flow in ways that should cause organ failure. It floods their muscles with energy that should tear the fibers apart. But somehow, they not only survive this process, they become stronger. Susan discovered something even more troubling in the bone samples. Human bones were not just dense, they were designed to handle stress loads far beyond anything their normal environment should require. Look at this structure, she said, displaying a magnified image. These bones are built to absorb impact forces that would shatter the skeletons of most species. Marcus had been studying the healing capabilities of human tissue. The regeneration rates seemed impossible without advanced medical technology. Their bodies repair damage at speeds that suggest constant battlefield conditions, he reported. Cuts seal themselves within days. Broken bones mend in weeks. Even major organ damage can heal completely given enough time. Helen made a disturbing discovery while examining brain tissue samples. They have neural pathways that activate only during extreme stress. It's like they have a second brain that takes over during dangerous situations. She paused, reviewing her data again. This secondary neural system appears designed for combat and survival decisions that require split-second timing and complete disregard for personal safety. Thomas found documentation of human medical practices and realized something alarming. They perform surgery on themselves during emergencies. They set their own broken bones. They continue functioning with injuries that would require immediate life support for other species. He looked up from his screen with wide eyes. They treat severe trauma as minor inconvenience. The team discovered that human blood contained backup systems for nearly every vital function. If they lost large amounts of blood, their bodies automatically created more. If their regular circulation failed, emergency pathways activated. If their brain suffered damage, other sections took over the lost functions. Susan ran comparative analysis against their database of 847 known intelligent species. Humans rank in the top percentile for physical strength, endurance, pain tolerance, healing speed, and survival capability, she announced. They surpass species that evolved on death worlds with gravity 3 times stronger than Earth. Emily discovered something that made the entire team uncomfortable. Human children played games that simulated combat, survival situations, and life-threatening challenges. Their entertainment included stories about defeating impossible odds, surviving catastrophic events, and fighting against overwhelming enemies. Their literature is filled with scenarios that would cause psychological trauma to most species, Helen observed, scrolling through human stories. They create fiction about planetary destruction, species extinction, and individual survival against hopeless odds. And they find this entertaining. Thomas made the most disturbing discovery of all. I found records of human athletic competitions, he said, his voice barely steady. They voluntarily put themselves through physical challenges that would hospitalize other species. They call it sports, but the stress levels match our definitions of torture. Marcus looked at his expanded team, seeing his own growing horror reflected in their faces. After days of intensive analysis, they had reached an inescapable conclusion. Humans were not just another intelligent species. They were biological weapons that had somehow achieved consciousness and space travel. They're not just survivors, Susan whispered, staring at the data streams covering every screen in the laboratory. They're living weapons that evolved beyond their original purpose. And they don't even realize how dangerous they are. The team sat in stunned silence, understanding that everything they thought they knew about biological evolution had just been proven wrong. Dr. Robert Clark arrived at the research station with boxes full of historical data about human evolution. As the galaxy's leading expert on how species developed intelligence, Robert had studied the peaceful growth of civilizations across hundreds of worlds. He expected to find the usual pattern of cooperation and gradual adaptation that marked every successful intelligent species. What he discovered instead kept him awake for 3 straight days. Robert spread out evolutionary charts on the large table in the main laboratory. Every intelligent species in their database showed the same basic pattern: gradual development through social cooperation, shared resources, and peaceful problem-solving. The charts looked like gentle slopes rising steadily upward over millions of years. Now look at human evolution, Robert said, displaying Earth's timeline on the wall screen. The human evolutionary chart looked like a jagged mountain range, with sharp peaks and sudden jumps that defied everything scientists understood about biological development. Marcus and his team gathered around as Robert pointed to the first major spike in human development. This jump corresponds to a massive volcanic eruption that covered half their planet in ash and killed most living things. Instead of going extinct like any reasonable species would, humans got smarter and stronger. Susan examined the geological data from Earth's history. The planet had suffered through ice ages that should have wiped out all large life forms, asteroid impacts that destroyed entire continents, and climate changes that made the surface nearly uninhabitable for thousands of years. Most species would have died during the first catastrophe, she observed. Humans survived all of them and became more dangerous each time. Thomas discovered something that made his hands shake as he read the report. They didn't just survive these disasters passively, he announced. They actively hunted other species to extinction during the worst periods. When food became scarce, they became more efficient predators. Robert pulled up data about human hunting methods, and the entire team fell silent. Unlike every other intelligent species, which had developed farming and peaceful food production, humans had perfected something called persistence hunting. They would chase large animals across vast distances until the prey collapsed from exhaustion and died. No other species hunts this way, Helen said, her voice filled with disbelief. They literally run their food to death over distances that would kill most predators. They can maintain pursuit for days without stopping. Emily discovered human migration patterns and realized something terrifying. They didn't just adapt to their dangerous planet, she said, pulling up maps on her screen. They spread across every hostile environment Earth had to offer. Frozen wastelands, burning deserts, dense jungles full of deadly creatures, high mountains where the air is too thin to breathe properly. Robert showed them comparative evolution studies from other intelligent species. The Arcturians had developed intelligence through peaceful cooperation in crystal caves. The Centaurians had evolved by sharing resources during long space migrations. The Delphinians had grown smarter by working together to build underwater cities. Every other species developed intelligence as a tool for cooperation and peace, Robert explained. Humans developed intelligence as a weapon for conquest and survival. They got smarter specifically to become better at killing things. Susan made a discovery that chilled everyone in the room. She had analyzed Earth's current ecosystem and found something impossible. Earth is classified as a death world class 12, she announced. The weather patterns alone would be considered weapons of mass destruction on civilized planets. Temperature swings that could kill most species happen regularly. They have storms that generate more energy than our starship engines. Thomas examined the predatory life forms that shared Earth with humans. Their planet is filled with creatures that could serve as military weapons, he reported. Venomous snakes, large cats with claws that could cut through metal, bears that weigh 800 pounds and can run faster than most vehicles. And humans decided to make some of these creatures into pets. Robert found documentation of human tribal warfare and realized why their evolution looked so chaotic. They didn't just fight their environment, he said, his voice growing quieter. They constantly fought each other. For hundreds of thousands of years, human groups have been in continuous warfare with other human groups. The team discovered that human technological advancement had come through military necessity. They had invented better weapons, stronger materials, and more efficient transportation primarily to gain advantages in combat against their own species. Peace was considered a temporary condition between wars. Hallen studied human brain development and found neural pathways that existed nowhere else in known biology. Their brains are wired for strategic thinking during combat situations, she explained. They can calculate complex battle scenarios while simultaneously fighting for their lives. They think tactically under extreme stress. Emily pulled up records of human expansion into space and found the pattern continuing. Even after they left their planet, they continued the same behavior, she observed. They built weapons into their exploration ships. They established military bases on other planets before building civilian settlements. Robert made the most disturbing discovery while reviewing Earth's current status. The planet's environment had become less dangerous over the past few thousand years, not because it had changed, but because humans had conquered every threat it offered. They had eliminated or controlled every predator, survived every climate extreme, and mastered every hostile environment. They didn't evolve despite their dangerous world, Robert concluded, staring at the data covering every wall of the laboratory. They evolved because of it. Earth created the perfect conditions for producing living weapons, and humans are the result. Marcus looked at his colleagues, seeing the same terrible understanding in their faces. Humans weren't just another intelligent species that had achieved space travel. They were evolutionary nightmares that had grown so dangerous they had run out of challenges on their own planet and decided to explore the galaxy instead. Dr. Andrew Foster had spent 15 years studying the minds of different alien species across the galaxy. He considered himself an expert on psychological patterns and behavioral analysis. When he arrived at the research station to examine human mental characteristics, he expected to find the usual signs of intelligence, social cooperation, logical thinking, and peaceful problem-solving methods. Instead, he discovered a species whose psychology defied every principle of rational behavior. Andrew began by reviewing human social structures, expecting to find the harmony and cooperation that marked every other intelligent civilization. What he found instead made him question his own sanity. Humans formed social bonds through shared danger, competitive activities, and something they called friendly insults. They showed affection by verbally attacking each other in ways that would start wars between other species. Sarah Davis, Andrew's research assistant, discovered human entertainment media and immediately called for help understanding what she was seeing. Andrew, they create fictional stories about the complete destruction of their own planet, she said, her voice shaking. And they watch these scenarios for fun. Andrew examined the entertainment files and found thousands of stories about zombie outbreaks, alien invasions, nuclear wars, and planetary extinctions. Human children grew up playing games that simulated combat, survival situations, and the collapse of civilization. What disturbed him most was that humans found these terrifying scenarios enjoyable and relaxing. Look at this, Sarah said, displaying another category of human entertainment. They create competitions where they voluntarily put themselves in dangerous situations. They call it reality television, but the stress levels would cause psychological trauma to most species. Andrew studied human military records and discovered tactical thinking that no rational species should possess. Humans had consistently defeated superior forces by using strategies that other civilizations classified as creative insanity. They would sacrifice their own advantages to create psychological confusion in their enemies. They used unpredictability as a weapon. Thomas joined Andrew's research team and made a discovery that kept him awake for days. They have a concept called spite, he explained to the group. Humans will deliberately harm themselves significantly if it means causing greater harm to their enemies. They consider mutual destruction an acceptable outcome in conflicts. Andrew found records of human behavior during their own wars and realized something terrifying about their psychology. When facing superior enemy forces, humans would often destroy valuable resources, including their own cities, rather than allow their enemies to capture them. They preferred mutual destruction over surrender. Sarah discovered human pet ownership patterns and called an emergency meeting. They adopt apex predators from their own planet and treat them as family members, she announced, showing images of humans living with creatures that could easily kill them. They share their homes with animals that hunt other mammals for food. The research team watched in amazement as humans played with creatures that had evolved specifically to kill things the size of humans. Large cats with razor-sharp claws lived peacefully in human homes. Dogs that descended from pack hunters became loyal companions who would die protecting their human families. Andrew examined human responses to natural disasters and found psychological patterns that challenged every theory about survival instincts. Instead of fleeing from danger, humans often ran toward it to help strangers. They would risk their own lives to save people they had never met, with no expectation of reward or recognition. This makes no evolutionary sense, Andrew told his team. Self-preservation should be their strongest instinct, but they consistently override it to help others, even members of different species. Thomas found documentation of human rescue operations during emergencies and discovered behavior that seemed impossible. Humans would enter burning buildings to save trapped people. They would dive into dangerous waters to rescue drowning strangers. They would donate their own organs to keep other humans alive, even when it caused them permanent disability. Sarah made a discovery that frightened everyone on the research team. They have a phrase that appears in their records before major achievements and disasters, she said. Hold my beer and watch this. According to linguistic analysis, this phrase signals that a human is about to attempt something extremely dangerous with uncertain chances of success. Andrew studied the psychological profiles of individual humans and found contradictions that should have caused mental instability. The same person could show extreme compassion for injured animals while simultaneously planning military strategies for defeating enemy forces. They could be gentle caregivers and efficient weapons simultaneously. The team discovered that humans formed emotional attachments to inanimate objects. They gave names to their vehicles, tools, and even weapons. They would risk their safety to protect possessions that had no practical value but carried emotional significance. Andrew examined human technological development and realized they had weaponized concepts that other species considered peaceful. They turned music into psychological warfare by creating sounds that could cause emotional distress or extreme aggression. They turned cooking into chemical warfare by developing spices and preparation methods that were toxic to other species. They don't just use tools as weapons, Andrew explained to his colleagues. They can turn any concept, any activity, any object into a weapon if the situation requires it. Their minds are constantly calculating combat applications for everything around them. Sarah found records of human humor and discovered jokes that would cause psychological trauma to peaceful species. Humans found dangerous situations amusing. They made light of scenarios that involved death, injury, and disaster. Their comedy often involved situations where someone was hurt or humiliated. Andrew completed his psychological evaluation and sat staring at his notes for hours. After weeks of intensive study, he had reached a conclusion that terrified him. Humans were not just physically dangerous. They were psychologically unpredictable in ways that made them exponentially more threatening than their biology suggested. They're not just living weapons, he whispered to his empty laboratory. They're living weapons with minds that can adapt any situation into a combat scenario, and they don't even realize how dangerous they are. The emergency council meeting aboard the research station brought together representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy. Marcus stood at the front of the main conference room, looking at faces from 12 different species who had traveled across star systems to hear his team's findings about humans. The weight of what he was about to reveal made his hands tremble slightly as he activated the main display screen. Distinguished colleagues, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his report. After 6 weeks of intensive analysis, we have reached a conclusion about the species called humans that will require immediate galactic policy decisions. The Arcturian representative, a tall crystalline being named Ambassador Crystal, leaned forward in her chair. The Arcturians were known for their peaceful nature and logical thinking. Dr. Webb, your preliminary reports have been quite concerning. Are you certain of your findings? Marcus nodded and activated the first set of data displays. Biological readings, psychological profiles, evolutionary charts, and technological assessments filled the screens around the room. Every piece of evidence points to the same conclusion. Humans are not the peaceful, ordinary species we initially believed them to be. Susan stepped forward to present the biological findings. The assembled representatives watched in growing alarm as she explained human muscle density, bone strength, cardiovascular capabilities, and the chemical called adrenaline that turned them into different creatures during dangerous situations. The Centaurian delegate, Ambassador Starwind, spoke first. These biological capabilities suggest a species designed for constant warfare. How did they achieve space travel with such aggressive evolutionary development? Robert answered by displaying human evolutionary history. The jagged timeline of disasters, extinctions, and violent adaptation made several representatives visibly uncomfortable. Unlike every other intelligent species in our database, humans evolved through conflict rather than cooperation. Every major evolutionary advance came through surviving catastrophic events that should have destroyed them. The Delphinian representative, who communicated through musical tones, played a series of worried notes. Their translator device converted the sounds into words. This evolutionary pattern indicates extreme danger to peaceful civilizations. Andrew presented the psychological evaluation, and the room fell completely silent. The combination of extreme altruism and calculated violence, the willingness to harm themselves to defeat enemies, and their ability to weaponize any concept or object created a profile that defied rational understanding. Ambassador Crystal's crystalline structure flickered with distress patterns. Dr. Foster, you are describing a species that is psychologically unpredictable. How can we establish diplomatic relations with beings whose behavior cannot be anticipated? That's exactly the problem, Andrew replied. They can switch between extreme kindness and lethal efficiency without warning. A human might risk their life to save a stranger in the morning and design weapons of mass destruction in the afternoon. Thomas displayed the most disturbing piece of evidence: human entertainment and recreational activities. The representatives watched footage of humans voluntarily putting themselves in dangerous situations for fun, creating fictional scenarios involving planetary destruction, and finding humor in situations that would traumatize other species. The Andromedan representative, a being of pure energy contained in a mechanical suit, buzzed with electronic concern. They treat survival scenarios as entertainment. This suggests a species that has become bored with normal existence and seeks increasingly dangerous stimulation. Marcus prepared to reveal the final piece of information, the discovery that would change everything. There is one more crucial fact we must discuss, he said, pulling up archived records that Robert had found buried in the galactic database. The screen displayed documents from 200,000 years ago, files that had been forgotten during the Great Expansion when the galactic community had grown too large to maintain complete records of every world and project. According to these archives, Marcus announced, the planet Earth, designation Sol 3, was originally established as a maximum security prison colony. The most dangerous criminals from across the galaxy were transported there and abandoned when the project was considered too expensive to maintain. The conference room erupted in shocked exclamations and alarmed discussions in multiple languages and communication methods. Ambassador Crystal's entire structure went dark for several seconds, the crystalline equivalent of fainting. The Centaurian delegate stood up so quickly that his chair fell over. Are you saying, Ambassador Starwind whispered, that humans are the descendants of the most dangerous individuals from hundreds of civilizations, who then evolved further by surviving on a death world for 200,000 years? Marcus nodded grimly. The evidence supports this conclusion. Their biological capabilities, psychological patterns, and evolutionary history all make sense when viewed through this lens. They are not just naturally dangerous. They are the ultimate result of concentrated danger, refined by countless generations of extreme survival conditions. The vote was unanimous, though it took 3 hours of heated debate to reach the final wording. The classification board displayed the official decision: species, human. Classification, hostile-friendly enigma. Threat level, maximum. Recommended approach, extreme caution with generous food offerings and expressions of friendship. The detailed recommendations filled several screens. Humanity should be monitored from a minimum safe distance of 3-star systems. Under no circumstances should they be informed about their planet's original purpose or their genetic heritage. All contact should involve abundant food offerings, as humans appeared to view sharing meals as a sign of peaceful intentions. Ambassador Crystal, having recovered from her shock, asked the final question that everyone was thinking. What do we do if they discover the truth about their origins? Marcus looked around the room at the representatives of peaceful civilizations who had lived in harmony for thousands of years. We hope they continue to believe they evolved naturally, he said quietly. Because if they ever realize what they actually are, and what we did to their ancestors, we may discover capabilities in them that we haven't seen yet. The meeting ended with a moment of silent prayer in 12 different traditions, all asking the same thing: that humans would remain ignorant of their true nature and continue their expansion into space without learning too much about the galaxy they were entering.